Chapter 28. Finding Fulfillment. In Western society, we tend to lead a goal-focused life. Life is all about achievement, and success is usually defined in terms of status, wealth, and power. Typically, we aren't that closely connected with our values, and because of that, we can easily get caught up in goals that are not truly meaningful to us. For instance, we can get so caught up in earning money or furthering our careers that we neglect to spend time with our family, the classic workaholic syndrome. A more destructive version of the goal-focused life is when our goals center on avoiding painful thoughts and feelings. As we've already seen, this leads to major suffering in the form of addictions, self-defeating behaviors, and increasing remoteness from what we really want. That's why, in ACT, we advocate a values-focused life. Yes, we set goals, because goals are essential to a fulfilling, rewarding life, but we set them guided by our values. This means the goals we pursue are a lot more personally meaningful, and life itself becomes much more rewarding. We live more in the present, and we appreciate what we have. So even as we move toward our goals, we find a deep satisfaction in life as it is right now. To make this distinction clearer, consider the following story. A mother decides to take her 2 kids to a fantastic zoo, which happens to be a good 2 hours drive away. One kid has only one aim: to get to the zoo as fast as possible. All the way there, he's sitting on the edge of his seat, in a state of constant frustration, every few minutes whining, "Are we there yet? I'm bored. How much longer?" The second kid, however, has 2 aims: to get to the zoo as fast as possible and to appreciate the journey. So this second kid is looking out the window, noticing all the fields full of cows and sheep, watching in fascination at the giant trucks zooming past, waving out of the window at friendly pedestrians. He's not frustrated, not whining, and not miserable. He's living in the moment, appreciating where he is, rather than focusing on where he's not. Now, if the car breaks down halfway and the kids never reach the zoo, then which child has had the most rewarding journey? And if the car does make it to the zoo, obviously both kids will have a great reward, but still, only one of them has enjoyed the journey. The values-focused life will always be more fulfilling than the goal-focused life, because you get to appreciate the journey even as you're working towards your goals. What's more, in a values-focused life, you're likelier to achieve your goals. Why? Because if you make sure that your goals are in line with your values, then you'll be more motivated to pursue them. Abundance. Connecting with your values and acting on them gives you a sense of contentment, fulfillment, and abundance, because living by your values gives you satisfaction right now. For instance, suppose you really want to buy a house. Buying a house is a goal, that is, something that can be achieved and crossed off the list. But suppose that because of your current finances, it will be a long time before you can actually buy that house. If you believe you can't be happy until you've achieved that goal, life will be pretty miserable. Ask yourself, what's this goal in the service of? What will it enable me to do that's truly meaningful? If the answer is, to provide security for my family, then you've identified a core value: taking good care of your family. And taking care of your family is something you can do right now in 101 different ways. For example, you can cook a healthy dinner, read a story to your kids, or give your partner a hug and some words of support. This doesn't mean you give up on your goals. If you want to buy a house, start saving. But you don't have to wait until you buy that house to have the satisfaction of caring for your family. Let's take another example. Suppose you have the long-term goal of being a doctor. The training will take some time, and I'd hate for you to spend 10 years of your life doggedly focused on that goal, thinking you can't be happy until you've achieved it. Now ask yourself, what is this goal in the service of? What will it enable me to do that's truly meaningful? Let's say you answered, I'd be able to help people. Now you've identified a core value: helping others. And helping others is something you can do right now, in a myriad of ways. You can visit an elderly relative, contribute money to a worthy cause, help a fellow student with their homework, or even do some volunteer work. This doesn't mean you give up your goal of becoming a doctor. What it means is, for the next 10 years, while you're working toward that goal, you have the ongoing satisfaction of living by your values, in this case, helping people. But suppose my motivation isn't helping people, you may be saying. Suppose I just want to get rich. Well, for starters, being rich is a goal, not a value. It's a goal because it can be achieved and crossed off the list. But to answer this question more fully, here's a transcript of a session I had with Jeff. Jeff was a businessman in his mid-30s, making a reasonable living but obsessed with earning more. He was making himself miserable by constantly focusing on all the people he knew who were richer than he was. I asked Jeff, "What do you really want?" Other motivations. Needless to say, there are plenty of other motivations for becoming rich, famous, or successful. But if you work through them as I did with Jeff, you'll eventually get down to core values, which you can live by right now. For example, you might say, if I were rich, I could buy a helicopter and learn to fly it. The values underlying this may be about learning new skills, personal development, having fun, or facing your fears. All these are values you can live by, right here and now, without being rich or owning a helicopter. Let's return to Sula, whose major goal was to find a loving partner. You'll recall that she set herself some smaller goals, including joining a dating agency and going on some blind dates. These were important steps, to be sure. But as long as Sula believed that life could not be fulfilling without a partner, she was setting herself up for a lot of unnecessary suffering. So I asked her to connect with the values underlying that goal. As a partner, Sula valued being loving, caring, open, sensual, and fun. I pointed out to her that although she didn't have a partner right now, she could still act on those values in other domains of her life. But that's not the same as having a partner, she said. Absolutely right, I replied. But which helps you to lead a fuller life, living by your values here and now, or making yourself miserable by constantly focusing on a goal you haven't achieved yet? Sula got the point. She started to be more loving and caring toward her family, and more open and fun-loving with her friends and coworkers. She also chose to be more sensual with herself, having regular massages, taking soothing hot baths, and enjoying erotic literature. And the result? Life became far more satisfying, even though she hadn't yet achieved her major goal. What if you do achieve that goal? The truth is, no matter how many goals you achieve, there will always be something else you want. You know what it's like. You get that fabulous new job and it's all very exciting. But how long before the novelty wears off? How long before you're yearning for something new? Or you get that pay rise and you love having all that extra money, but how long before you take it for granted and want more? Or perhaps you meet the partner of your dreams and fall madly in love, but how long before you start noticing that your dream lover snores or wears the same socks 3 days in a row? If you're living a goal-focused life, then no matter what you have, it's never enough. Not so with the values-focused life, because your values are always available to you, no matter what your circumstance. Remember Viktor Frankl, who lived by his values while stuck in a Nazi concentration camp. So, if you're feeling miserable because you haven't yet achieved a particular goal, here's what to do. First, find the values underlying your goal and then ask yourself, what's a small action I can take right now that's consistent with those values? Next, go ahead and take action, and do it mindfully. Your values are always with you, always available, and acting faithfully to them is usually deeply rewarding. So the more you embrace your values, the greater your sense of fulfillment. And in the next chapter, we'll learn how to take this attitude even deeper. Chapter 29. A Life of Plenty. Have you ever gazed in wonder at a brilliant sunset, or an impossibly large full moon, or the ocean waves crashing against a rocky shore? Ever looked adoringly into the eyes of your child or your partner? Reveled in the aroma of baking pies, or the fragrant scent of jasmine or roses? Listened in delight to a singing bird or a purring cat, or the laughter of a small child? So far in this book, we've spent a lot of time on handling unpleasant thoughts and feelings, but precious little on enhancing the positive ones. This is deliberate. Our whole society, and the self-help movement in particular, is so focused on creating positive feelings that this focus itself has become a major component of the happiness trap. The more your life is focused on having pleasant feelings, the more you'll struggle against the uncomfortable ones, creating and intensifying the whole vicious cycle of struggle and suffering. But as a beneficial byproduct of creating a meaningful life, all sorts of positive experiences and emotions will happen. So it only makes sense to appreciate these things to the fullest, while avoiding the trap of making them your main goal in life. Every day is a wealth of opportunities to appreciate the world we live in. Practicing your mindfulness skills will help you make the most of your life right now, even as you take action to change it for the better. We have always had expressions like, "Count your blessings," and "Stop and smell the roses." These sayings point to the abundance in our lives. We are surrounded by wonderful things, but sadly, we usually take them for granted. So here are a few suggestions for waking up and experiencing the richness of the world around you. When you eat something, take the opportunity to savor it, to fully taste it. Let your thoughts come and go and focus on the sensations in your mouth. Most of the time when we eat and drink, we're scarcely aware of what we're doing. Given that eating is a pleasurable activity, why not take the time to appreciate it fully? Instead of wolfing your food down, eat it slowly, actually chew it. After all, you wouldn't watch a video on fast forward, so why eat your food that way? Next time it's raining, pay attention to the sound of it, the rhythm, the pitch, the ebb and flow of the volume, and take a look at the raindrops trickling down the windows. Notice the patterns they make and the way they catch the light. And when the rain stops, go for a walk and notice the freshness of the air, the way the wet leaves sparkle, and the way the sidewalks glisten as if they'd been polished. Better yet, put on rain gear or grab an umbrella and go for a walk during the rain, and notice what it's like to be warm and dry and secure in the midst of that cold, wet downpour. Next time it's sunny, take a few moments to appreciate the warmth and the light. Notice how everything brightens: houses, flowers, trees, the sky, people. Go for a walk, listen to the birds, and notice how the sun feels against your skin. When you hug or kiss someone, or even shake hands, fully engage in it. Notice what you can feel. Let your warmth and openness flow through that contact. Next time you're feeling happy or calm or joyful or content or some other pleasant emotion, take the opportunity to fully notice what that feels like. Notice what you feel in your body. Notice how you're breathing, talking, or gesturing. Notice any urges, thoughts, memories, sensations, and images. Take a few moments to really drink in this emotion, to marvel that you are capable of having such experiences. Look with new eyes at the people you care about, as if you'd never seen them before. Do this with your spouse or partner, friends, family, children, co-workers, colleagues. Notice how they walk, talk, eat, and drink, and gesture with their faces, bodies, and hands. Notice their facial expressions. Notice the lines of their faces and the color of their eyes. Notice the way they smile, how their mouth moves, how their eyes twinkle. Notice the way they laugh, the sounds they make, the facial changes, the shoulder movements. Next time you see an animal, whether it's a family pet, a cat on a wall, or a bird in a tree, take a moment to stop and fully observe it. Look at it as if you were a young child who still doesn't even know the name or nature of this animal. Notice its structure and its movements, its colors and contours, its face and its body. Once a day, examine some familiar object that you normally take for granted, such as a penknife, a glass of water, a pen, a book, a shirt or a shoe, a vacuum cleaner, a wedding ring, a window frame, literally anything. Study it as if it were an alien artifact that had just dropped out of a passing UFO. Notice what you can see and touch, and smell and hear and taste, if appropriate. Take a moment to appreciate the role this object plays in your life. Before you get out of bed in the morning, take 10 deep breaths and focus on the movement of your lungs. Cultivate a sense of wonder that you are alive, that your lungs have provided you with oxygen all night long, even while you were fast asleep. As you connect with your values and act in accordance with them, you're likely to notice changes in the people around you. The more you act like the person you want to be with your partner, children, friends, family, and coworkers, the more you'll notice their positive responses toward you. Enjoy those responses, be mindful of them, and notice what is happening and appreciate it. When you act with openness, kindness, and acceptance, the chances are you'll receive the same in return. And if you don't, you may have to make some choices about what sort of people you spend your time with. So as your relationships improve, make the most of them. Savor those positive interactions. Make sure you're present. Catch yourself drifting off into the land of thoughts, and bring your attention back to whomever you're with. A great job, a loving partner, a home of your own. All these are goals. As you work toward them, connect with the values underlying them. Notice that you're living by those values, and appreciate the satisfaction this brings. If your values include sharing and connecting, then as well as noticing the abundance in your life, talk about it with others. Most of us tend to talk far more about the negative aspects of our lives than the positives. Let people know what you appreciate about them, about life, about yourself. This doesn't mean go around with a fake smile, pretending to be happy all the time. It means be genuine, open, and balanced. Share the difficult things in your life and the rewarding parts. And make sure to let people know what they mean to you, what you appreciate about them, and what you're grateful for. When you achieve goals that are in line with your values, there's often a pleasant emotion of some sort. Notice how it feels and enjoy it. Even tiny, easy goals can give great satisfaction when achieved. For example, I feel enormous satisfaction when I tidy my desktop, cook a healthy dinner, or send a brief email to an overseas relative. So appreciate and savor those feelings. It's all too easy to miss them when the thinking self tries to distract you with not good enough stories. It's all about connection. The more you open your eyes and notice the things you've taken for granted, and the more you live by what you value while appreciating what you have, the richer, fuller, and more meaningful your life becomes. Mindfulness skills help you cultivate an attitude of openness, interest, and receptiveness toward the world around you. This attitude in itself will make life more rewarding. You'll notice more opportunities, you'll be more stimulated and interested, you'll find more contentment, and your relationships will improve. I like to put it like this: life gives most to those who make the most out of what life gives. And now, after all that focus on positive emotion, it's time for another reminder. Don't get too attached to pleasant feelings. Don't center your life on chasing them. Pleasant feelings will come, and they will go, just like every other feeling you've ever had in your life. So allow them to happen spontaneously, while you focus on living by your values. Enjoy them and appreciate them when they come along, but don't cling to them. As with all emotions, just make room for them and let them come and go as they please. At times, mindfulness is easy, and at times it's incredibly hard. In fact, one of the hardest things about mindfulness is remembering to practice it. Stephen Hayes likens it to riding a bicycle. When you're on a bike, you're always about to fall over. You're always catching yourself, continually adjusting your balance. So it is with mindfulness. No matter how deeply connected we are with our here and now experience, our thoughts will continually pull us out of it. We have to keep catching ourselves, realizing our mind has pulled us off balance yet again. And remember how hard it was to balance when you first started learning to ride that bike? And how it got easier over time? Life is like climbing a mountain. There are easy stretches and tough ones. But if you're open and interested in your experience, then the obstacles you encounter will help you to learn, grow, and develop, so that as time goes on, your climbing skills improve. Naturally, it's far easier to be mindful when the going is easy than when it gets tough. Yet the more you face your difficulties with mindfulness, the more you'll find you grow stronger, calmer, and wiser. This is easier said than done, but you can do it, especially once you've read the next chapter. Chapter 30. Facing fear. How's it all going? Are you taking action? Making some meaningful changes in your life? If not, you've probably come up against at least one of the 4 major obstacles to change. These obstacles are so universal, they even form their own acronym: fear, fusion with unhelpful thoughts, expectations that are unrealistic, avoidance of uncomfortable feelings, remoteness from your values. Let's take a look at these obstacles one by one. F. Fusion with unhelpful thoughts. By now, you're well familiar with cognitive fusion. As soon as you start setting goals, radio doom and gloom will start to broadcast. I can't do it. It's too hard. I'm wasting my time. There's no point in trying, and a whole playlist of other golden oldies. The solution is to use your diffusion skills. See these thoughts for what they are, just words. Let them come and go, and return your focus to taking effective action. E. Expectations that are unrealistic. Unrealistic expectations can create a major roadblock. If your goals are too ambitious or there are too many of them, you'll feel overwhelmed and will probably give up, or at least put it off for another day. If this has happened to you, the solution is to break your goals down into smaller bites. Ask yourself, what's the smallest, easiest step I could take that would bring me a little closer to achieving this goal? Then do it. Once you've taken that step, ask the same question. What's the next small, easy step that would bring me a little bit closer to my goal? It's like that old joke. How do you eat an elephant? One mouthful at a time. Here are two other common unrealistic expectations. Two short time frames for results. The need to be perfect, to make no mistakes. The solution for any unrealistic expectation is simple. Make it more realistic. If your time frame is unrealistic, extend it. And meanwhile, break down your large goal into smaller bites. And as for making mistakes, that's a fundamental part of being human. Almost every activity you take for granted today, reading, talking, walking, riding a bicycle, was once hard to do. Think how many times a baby falls on its bottom while learning to walk. But the point is, you learned by making mistakes. You learned what not to do, and you learned how to do it differently, so you became more effective. Making mistakes is an essential part of learning, so embrace it. Let go of aiming for perfection. It's much more satisfying and fulfilling to be human. A. Avoidance of uncomfortable feelings. The more you try to avoid unpleasant feelings, the harder it will be to make important changes. Change involves risk. It requires facing your fears, stepping out of your comfort zone, all of which points to one thing. Change will usually give rise to uncomfortable feelings. By now you're well aware of the whole vicious cycle that results when we try to avoid discomfort. The only effective solution is true acceptance, not tolerance or putting up with it. Therefore, practice your expansion skills, make room for your discomfort, and focus on taking effective action. Of course, setting and working toward goals will not only create discomfort. It will often generate pleasant feelings too, such as excitement and curiosity, and the pleasure and satisfaction you'll feel when you finally achieve those goals. But you can't have the pleasant feelings if you're not first willing to face the discomfort. R. Remoteness from your values. It's not enough to clarify your values. You need to connect with them. You need to know what's important in your heart and remind yourself on a regular basis. And you need to make sure your goals are in line with those values. Doing this will provide you with motivation, inspiration, and meaning. But if you're remote from your values, it's all too easy to lose heart, give up, or get sidetracked. The more remote you are from your deepest values, the more your goals seem pointless, meaningless, or insignificant. Obviously, this doesn't do much for motivation. The solution? Connect with your values. If you haven't already done so, write them down. Read them through and change them as required. Share them with someone you trust. Reread them on a regular basis. First thing in the morning, mentally go over them. At the end of each week, take a few minutes to check in with yourself and ask, how true have I been to my values? Back to fusion. So that's fear. Fusion, expectations, avoidance, and remoteness. And of these four obstacles, fusion is probably the most common. When we fuse with unhelpful thoughts, the demons on our boat grow bigger and nastier. And the scariest of all these demons is called, "You will fail," which usually hangs around with several of his pals. There's no point in trying. You're wasting your time. And look at all the times you failed in the past. If we take these demons seriously and give them our full attention, our boat is doomed to drifting out at sea. So when they appear, it's helpful to remember this quote by Henry James. Until you try, you don't know what you can't do. In setting goals for ourselves, we're talking about what is possible, not what is certain. There's very little certainty in this world. You can't even be certain that you'll still be alive tomorrow. So none of us can ever be certain that we'll achieve our goals. But what we can be certain of is this: if we don't even attempt to achieve them, there's no possibility of success. Reason giving. The mind is very good at coming up with reasons for not doing the things we really want to do. Take physical exercise. In most Western countries, over 40% of the adult population is overweight or obese, and in the United States alone, it's over 50%. Yet almost all of us, deep down inside, value our health. Sure, many of us neglect our health, some of us much of the time. But that doesn't mean we don't value it. It just means we're not taking action. To clarify this, ask yourself, which would I prefer, a healthy body or an unhealthy one? The fact is, most of us would prefer to eat healthier and exercise more. So why don't we? Well, part of the explanation is that our mind is a genius at giving us reasons not to. I don't have enough time today, this week, this month. I'm too tired. I can't be bothered. I hate exercise. It's too cold outside. The first thing to realize is that reasons are just thoughts. The second thing is that thoughts do not control your behavior. Does that sound surprising to you? Well, check your own experience. How often have you had the thought, I can't do this, and then gone ahead and done it? How often have you thought, yes, I'm going to do this, and then not followed through on it? How often have you thought about taking hurtful, harmful, hostile, or self-defeating actions but not actually done so? It's just as well that thoughts don't control our behavior. Otherwise, most of us would be in prison, laid up in the hospital, or dead. To demonstrate conclusively that thoughts do not control your behavior, do these 2 exercises. 1. Think to yourself, I can't scratch my head. I can't scratch my head. And as you do, lift your arm and scratch your head. 2. Think to yourself, I have to close this book. I have to close this book. And as you do, keep the book open. How'd you go? No doubt you found that you could take those actions even though your thoughts said you couldn't. Of course, thoughts can influence your behavior, even though they can't control it. And the greater the degree of fusion with a thought, the greater the influence it will have on your behavior. This means that reasons are not a problem unless we fuse with them. That is, take them as the literal truth, or treat them as commands we must obey. Therefore, it's important to realize that reasons are not facts. Here's an example of a reason. I can't go for a run because I'm too tired. But does being tired make you physically unable to run? Of course not. You can feel tired and still go for a run. In fact, ask any athlete. They'll tell you that sometimes they can feel tired or sluggish and end up having one of their best workouts. Here's an example of a fact. I can't go for a run because a spinal injury has completely paralyzed my legs. Does spinal paralysis of the legs make it physically impossible to run? Yes. So the above statement is a fact. Reasons are basically just excuses, things we say to justify what we do or don't do. Can you feel as though you don't have enough time and still exercise? Can you feel tired and still exercise? Can you feel as though you can't be bothered and still exercise? Can you hate exercise and still exercise? Can you notice that it's cold outside and still exercise? Obviously, the answer to all these questions is yes. The reasons given are all just excuses for not doing exercise. As soon as you have to face any sort of challenge, your mind will come up with a whole list of reasons not to do it. I'm too tired. It's too hard. I'll only fail. It's too expensive. It'll take too long. I'm too depressed, etc. And that's okay, as long as we see these reasons for what they are. Excuses. How do you tell an excuse from a fact? Often we know full well when we're making excuses. We just need to be honest with ourselves. But if you've set a valued goal and your mind gives you a reason not to attempt it, sometimes it's not so clear that this is just an excuse. So if you're genuinely unsure whether the thought is merely an excuse for inaction or a statement of fact about something that truly is impossible, just ask yourself this question. If the person you care about more than anyone else in the world were kidnapped, and the kidnappers told you they will never release that person until you take a particular action toward your goals, would you then take action? If the answer is yes, then you know that any reason for not taking that action is merely an excuse. Yes, you may be saying, but that's just a silly hypothetical question. In the real world, the person I love has not been kidnapped. Right, you are. But what's at stake in the real world is something equally important. Your life. Do you want to live a life in which you do the things that are really meaningful to you? Or do you want to live a life of drifting aimlessly, letting your demons run the ship? Okay, I hear you say. I agree that I could attempt this goal, but it's not that important to me. The question here is, are you being honest with yourself? Or are you just buying into another thought? If the goal you're avoiding is truly unimportant to you, fine, don't attempt it. But make sure you check in with your values. And if this goal really is something you value, then you are faced with a choice. Either act in accordance with what you value or let yourself be pushed around by your own thoughts. In particular, you need to watch out for this sneaky thought. If this were really so important to me, I'd be doing it already. This thought is just another reason in disguise. The reasoning goes something like this. I haven't taken action up to now, which means it can't really be that important, which means it's not a true value of mine, which means there's no point in putting any effort into it. This reasoning is based on the false assumption that humans will naturally act in line with their values. But if this were true, there'd be no need for a book such as this, or a therapy such as ACT. The fact is, many of us don't act on our values for long periods of time, months, years, or even decades. But those values are always there deep inside us, no matter how remote from them we are. A value is like your body. Even if you've totally neglected it for years, it's still there. It's still an essential part of your life, and it's never too late to connect with it. You may say, but it's not that easy. These reasons seem so convincing. That's right. They do seem convincing if you fuse with them. So you need to remember, they're just thoughts. You can then diffuse them in a number of different ways. You can simply notice them and label them. Each time a reason pops into your head, acknowledge it by silently saying, reason giving. You can say to yourself, thanks, mind. You can acknowledge, I'm having the thought, I can't do this because... You can ask yourself the kidnap question. If the life of a loved one depended on it, could I attempt this goal, even with all these reasons not to? You can name the stories underlying the reasons. The too tired story, or the not enough time story. You can simply let these thoughts come and go, like passing cars, while you focus your attention on taking action. Where to from here? This is a key juncture in the book. You know your values. You've set some goals. Now it's time to take action. Fear is usually the only thing that prevents you, and now you know how to deal with it. Yet even so, you may still be resisting taking action. So in the next chapter, we're going to look at willingness, a powerful ally in overcoming resistance. Chapter 31. Willingness. Suppose you're climbing a mountain that has spectacular views from the top. You're halfway up when you come to a really steep slope where the path is narrow and rocky. Right about now, it starts pouring with rain. Now you're cold and wet. You're struggling up this steep, slippery track, and your legs are getting tired, and you're gasping for air. And you start thinking, why didn't anyone tell me it would be this tough? At this point, you have a choice. You can turn back or keep going. If you keep going, it's not because you want to get colder and wetter and more exhausted. It's because you want the satisfaction of reaching the summit and experiencing those magnificent vistas. You're willing to endure the discomfort, not because you want it or enjoy it, but because it gets between you and where you're going. My lack of willingness. I first got permission from Stephen Hayes to write this book back in July 2004, but I didn't start writing it until 4 months later. Why not? Because every time I thought about making a start, I would feel this huge surge of anxiety, a fist-sized knot in my stomach, tightness in my chest, and an urge to stay as far away as possible from my computer. Thoughts would flow through my head. You're wasting your time. You'll never get published. You don't even know how to write. It'll just be a load of rubbish. It's too tough. It'll take too much time. You're kidding, right? One particularly troublesome thought was indeed a fact. I had already written 5 books, each of which had taken a huge amount of time and effort, and none of which had ever seen print. Unfortunately, I fused with all those thoughts and avoided all those feelings. And, as a result, I didn't write a word. Naturally, the more I put off writing, the more dissatisfied I felt. I distracted myself in all kinds of ways. Reading, going to movies, eating chocolate. I also tried telling myself, there's no hurry. I've got the whole rest of my life to write it. But my dissatisfaction continued to grow. I was all too aware that my demons were in charge of the boat, and I felt like a total hypocrite. Finally, after 4 months of growing frustration, I thought to myself, you've got all these terrific tools and techniques. You use them with your clients every day and get great results. How about putting into practice what you preach? So I sat down and wrote, what is my goal? And I answered, to write a self-help book based on ACT. Next, I wrote, what are the values underlying my goal? And I answered, the underlying values are challenging myself, personal growth through facing my fears, helping people. After all, this book could help a lot more people than I ever could through one-on-one therapy. Supporting my family, because if this book makes money, my family prospers. Modeling for others the principles that I advocate, that is practicing what I preach. Developing my career, and the creativity of the writing process itself. Writing all this down made a huge difference. It clarified for me that not only would this book benefit others, it would also benefit me. And even if it never got published, I would learn and grow simply through the act of writing it. Next I wrote, what thoughts, feelings, sensations, and urges am I willing to have in order to complete this goal? This is a very important question, which we need to ask ourselves repeatedly when facing life's challenges. And although we've already discussed it earlier in the book, it's important to really clarify the word willingness. Willingness doesn't mean you like, want, enjoy, desire, or approve of something. Willingness means you'll allow it, make room for it, or let it be, in order to do something that you value. If I said, "How'd you like a course of injections that will make you feel weak and tired for several months, make all your hair fall out, and make you vomit repeatedly?" I'm sure you'd say, "No way." But if you had cancer, and I offered you a course of chemotherapy that could totally cure it, you'd take it willingly, and side effects be damned. Why would you put yourself through all that? Not because you like it, want it, or approve of it, but in order to keep on doing something that you value, living. Willingness means we make room for the negative side effects, such as unpleasant thoughts and feelings, in order to create a meaningful life, and this in turn gives us plenty of positive side effects. But willingness doesn't mean merely tolerating, gritting our teeth, or being able to stand it. It means actively embracing our experience, even though we don't like it. Suppose you're in a loving, committed relationship, and your partner wants to invite his or her father over for dinner. And suppose you intensely dislike your partner's father. You dislike his dress sense. You dislike his aftershave. You dislike his opinions and his boastfulness and his arrogance. Yet inviting this man for dinner would mean the world to your partner. If it's really important for you to support your partner, then you could invite this man over for dinner, greet him warmly at the door, welcome him into your house, and make him feel completely at home, even though you intensely dislike him. That's willingness. Willingness in everyday life. Willingness is something we practice in small ways every day of our lives. For example, when you go to the movies, you're willing to pay for the ticket. It's not that you actively want to pay for it. If someone said, "Here's a free ticket," you wouldn't say, "No, thanks. I really prefer to pay my hard-earned money for that ticket." So it's not that you like paying for that ticket. It's more that you consent to pay for it in the interest of seeing the movie. Similarly, if you're going on vacation, you probably don't enjoy packing your suitcases. You don't desire it, but you go ahead and do it in the interest of having a good trip. And if you've ever taken a driving test, you probably didn't want all that stress, but you consented to it in the interest of getting your license. Willingness is essential because it's the only effective way to deal with life's obstacles. Whenever an obstacle presents itself, you can either say yes or no. If you say no, your life gets smaller. If you say yes, your life gets bigger. If you keep saying yes, there's no guarantee life will get easier because the next obstacle may be just as difficult or even tougher. But saying yes becomes more of a habit, and the experience you gain from saying yes gives you a reservoir of strength. Even if you don't want to say yes, you can still choose to. And each time you make that choice, you grow as a person. At the same time, the more you practice expansion, diffusion, and connection, the less discomfort you actually have to deal with. If you see the thought, you'll fail as only words. It's a lot easier to accept it. And when you turn off that struggle switch, your feelings are a lot easier to live with because they don't get amplified. When the struggle switch is on, you do whatever you can to avoid, fight with, suppress, change, or get rid of uncomfortable feelings. And when it's off, you simply allow them to be. So we could also refer to this switch, with its poles reversed, as the willingness switch. When the willingness switch is on, you give your feelings permission to be as they are, and when the switch is off, you fight or avoid them. Willingness has no shades of gray. Willingness is an all-or-nothing experience, like being pregnant or being alive. Either you're willing or you're not. The switch is either on or off. There's no in-between. Those in-between positions are variously called tolerance, resignation, or giving up. This all-or-nothing property of willingness is expressed in the ancient Eastern saying, "You can't leap a chasm in 2 jumps." To pursue her goal of finding a partner, Sula joined a commercial dating agency. She was willing to make room for feelings of vulnerability, insecurity, anxiety, and for thoughts like, "I'm wasting my money. I'll meet only weirdos and losers, and if I do meet anyone nice, they won't like me." Her willingness enabled her to go on some dates and meet some nice guys. To spend more quality time with her children, Michelle was willing to have the anxiety of repeatedly saying no to her boss's extra work demands. To reclaim her life and put her alcoholism behind her, Donna was willing to grieve for her husband and child. to let her sadness be there, without trying to drink it away. Kirk was a commercial lawyer who realized, once he had connected with his values, that his work was not meaningful. He had become a lawyer primarily for status and money, and also to win the approval of his parents, who were both lawyers. What he really wanted to do, though, was to help and care for people, especially to help them grow, learn, and develop. Ultimately, he decided to retrain as a psychologist. In order to do this, he was willing to make room for a lot of discomfort, loss in income, many years of extra study, parental disapproval, anxiety over whether he was doing the right thing, thoughts of all the years he had wasted, and so on. The last time I saw Kirk, he'd graduated as a psychologist and loved the profession, but he'd never have gotten there without willingness to have all that discomfort, my willingness. So now let's return to how I wrote this book. As mentioned above, my next step in overcoming my inertia was to write down all the thoughts, feelings, sensations, and urges that I would be willing to have in order to achieve my goal. My thoughts included, "It's too hard. I can't write. I'm wasting my time. And I'll never get published." My feelings included anxiety, boredom, and frustration. My sensations included a tightness in my jaw, churning in the stomach, sweaty palms, and a racing heart. And last but not least, I had strong urges to run away, play with the dog, go to sleep, get something to eat or drink, read a book, look up words in the dictionary, surf the internet, watch television, or do anything else except write. Writing this down was enormously useful because it helped me take a realistic look at the situation, to prepare for the demons I'd be facing on my voyage. That way, no surprises. Next I wrote, "Is there any one of these thoughts and feelings and sensations and urges that I can't handle, provided I practice expansion, diffusion, and connection?" And the answer I wrote was, no. Provided I diffuse these thoughts, make room for these feelings, and connect with the action I am taking, then I can handle every one of them. The next question was, what would be useful to remind myself? In answer to this, I pulled out a blank card and wrote down 4 inspiring quotes. "A journey of 1,000 miles begins with 1 step." Lao Tse. "The first draft of anything is shit." Ernest Hemingway. "Don't be afraid to go out on a limb. That's where the fruit is." H. Jackson Brown. 20 years from now, you will be more disappointed by the things that you didn't do than by the ones you did do. So throw off the bowlines, sail away from the safe harbor, catch the trade winds in your sails, explore, dream, discover. Mark Twain. Obviously, these quotes apply to any meaningful enterprise, not just writing. I find them both reassuring and inspiring. And ever since that day, I've kept that card beside my computer and I frequently reread it. Following that, I wrote, "How can I break this goal down into smaller steps?" My answer was, I only need to write 1 chapter at a time. Actually, I only need to write 1 paragraph at a time. Come to think of it, I only need to write 1 sentence at a time. Once I realized that I only needed to write 1 sentence at a time, my anxiety lessened considerably. To write a book, that's overwhelming. But to write a sentence, that's a lot easier. Next I wrote, "What's the smallest, easiest step I can begin with?" And I answered, "Write 1 sentence." Finally I asked, "When will I take that first step?" And I answered, "Right now." So there and then, I forced myself to start writing. The knot in my stomach was huge, so I studied it as if I were a scientist. It felt like a lump that started just above my waist and reached up underneath my rib cage. There was movement within that lump, a sort of squelching, and also a slight sense of nausea. I observed it for a minute, breathed into it and made room for it. I reminded myself, this is nothing more than an unpleasant sensation, coupled with an urge to run away. And I asked myself, am I willing to have this in order to pursue my goal? The answer came back loud and clear. Yes! Then I turned my attention to the thoughts swirling around in my head, radio doom and gloom playing at full volume. I pictured those thoughts as words on a television screen. I looked at them and saw them for what they were, words and pictures. Then I let them come and go while I focused on my writing. That was November 2004. Now, as I'm writing this sentence, it is 18 months later, and the book is nearly finished. It has taken me many hundreds of hours to write, and I've had many unpleasant thoughts and feelings during that time. I've also had enormous satisfaction from acting in accordance with my values, and I've also had plenty of extremely pleasant thoughts and feelings. Every time I've completed a paragraph, every time I've completed a chapter, every time I've sat down and written, even though I didn't feel like it. Of course, I still have no idea whether this book will ever be successful, but no matter what happens, I've gained enormously in writing it. I've developed my writing skills, learned how to simplify concepts in order to teach them more effectively, developed new ideas to enhance my work, proved to myself that ACT really works, when I apply it anyway, and had the satisfaction of living by my values. It's been vastly more fulfilling than the 4 months I spent avoiding writing. Now imagine how different it would have been if my only purpose in writing this book was to become rich and famous. There would be no satisfaction or fulfillment until that goal was achieved. And because that particular outcome is so unlikely, if that were my only motivation, I probably would have given up long ago. The power of black and white again and again. Throughout this book, I've emphasized the importance of writing, to clarify your thoughts, to aid conscious memory, to enhance motivation. When you set your values and goals down in black and white, you're far likelier to follow through on them. So I recommend that you write out an action plan, using the format below, to help you achieve any goal that you're currently procrastinating on.